Welcome you all. So, today's class we are going to discuss about concrete in construction and demolition operation. So, these two operations have a major hazard, if you look at, is primarily falls. Okay. So, in the last class itself, in regard to falls, we have discussed about scaffolds. Okay. Scaffolds is where workers tend to move and complete their work. So, in general it is referred as workers platform. So, the other one is primarily form work, which we will see in today's class. So, as a result of some failures or the way with which form work is not put in place in construction, so there are a lot of fall hazards, okay, and lot of failures in construction also. So, now a quick an introduction to what is concrete. Everyone knows what is a cement, okay, and when it is mixed with water, so generally we get something as a cement paste, and this is actually used like a glue or a binder in construction, okay, and the cement plus fine aggregate, okay, so plus water, when it is mixed you call what is called mortar. And the mortar, you know very well, it is used for brick masonry construction, and again it serves as a binder, okay. Then cement fine aggregate plus what you call coarse aggregate and little of admixture wherever it is required. So, with all these combination you call what is called concrete, okay. So, this concrete is what we are going to see in today's class. Now, if you see general concreting operation involves 3 steps primarily, but we also say 4 steps. I will tell you what is a 3 and 4 step. So, number 1 process is primarily called shuttering or form work, and the number 2 is primarily reinforcement, and the third one is placing or pouring concrete. So, these are the 3 steps. When the concrete has attained the strength, we primarily do de-shuttering, that is termed as a 4th operation, okay, 4th step. So, these are the 3 processes we have, and we are going to talk more about shuttering only other than these 2. This concrete related hazards we will discuss along with the health issues, because more health problems are related to concrete, and reinforcement we will discuss along with hazards with caught in between or struck by and so on. So, this we will discuss along with the crane operations, okay. So, these 2 I am not touching upon today. So, what we are going to discuss is form work or shuttering. So, what is a form work? Form work is a temporary mold that acts as a support for the fresh concrete, okay. Otherwise, concrete is a flowable material. Unless you give some support and proper shape, then you won't get the concrete into desired shape. So, form work in very simpler form, it acts like a support so that you get the desired shape of the building. So, then now there are so many ways of concreting form work available these days. It can be partially fabricated or it can be completely fabricated. You also get manufactured commercial products available these days, or you can also go directly and do conventional way of customizing and doing the form work also for small construction jobs. So, all ways are available. Now, let us talk about the temporary structures. There are a lot of terminology that comes together, which generally is confusing when you talk about form work. So, along with the form work, the terms that comes together are all which are interchangeably used are form work, centering, shuttering, staging and scaffolding. So, what is a form work? As I told, this is nothing but a mold to actually pour in the concrete, okay. So, this is primarily a bridge pier construction. So, primarily you create all the form work structure. So, when you pour the concrete, it gets the shape of the inside of the form work, okay. Centering is nothing but the horizontal temporary arrangement. In a way, slab form works are generally called as centering. Slab beam form works are generally called centering. The next one is shuttering. All your vertical temporary arrangements are primarily called shuttering. So, your columns or your wall form works are generally called shuttering. So, this is a picture to show your wall form work, okay, which is also called shuttering. The next one is staging. Stagings are all your props and supports either for centering or for shuttering, which implies either for vertical supports or your horizontal supports. All your props and supports are nothing but you called staging. And scaffolding is actually, I said, it's a workers platform wherein workers try to reach the construction site or the place of work where they have to do, and is primarily like a helping the workers and material movement. So these are the different terminology, and all these are called temporary structures. The minute the actual building construction is completed, then all these structures will be removed from the site. So now what are the requirements of false work? So again, if I have to recap and tell, there are a lot of types of formwork. For example, jump formwork, slipping formwork, slip formwork. Then we also have climbing formwork, tunnel formwork, table formwork. So like this, there are so many varieties available, and I am not going to talk about all those specialized varieties. We are only going to discuss about general strength and safety issues on formworks. So what are the requirements of formwork? Because it's only a temporary structure, and once a permanent construction comes in place, all these temporary structures will be removed. So why to worry too much on these formwork? No, that is not the way it should be looked at, because the strength of the formwork also affects the quality of construction, or even the quality or the strength of the actual construction also. So first requirement, the formwork should have enough strength and stability, should withstand all types of possible loads that comes on to the formwork. It should be very safe, it should support the concrete weight, it should support the workers' weight, and also it should be primarily having a lot of integrity with the structure, so that even with whatever lateral forces or vertical forces or any way the force comes in, it actually turns firm and stable. It should be rigid, which is achieved by lot of braces and ties, and it should be having a sufficient amount of deflection which is within the permissible limits. There can be lot of deflections which can happen because of the dead load coming on to the formwork, then the load of the fresh concrete, live load because of movement of workers and equipments, and also forces caused by pumping in of concrete or vibration of concrete as a result of compaction. So all these should be taken into account. So the formwork should be very much rigid and stable. Erection and release, obviously formwork is not like a use and throw purpose. It should be serving for multiple rounds of construction. So based on the life cycle of material of construction, the life cycle of formwork also depends on, okay. There are a lot of material with which formworks are generally coming these days, okay, starting from timber or even aluminium, steel formworks and so on. So based on the initial cost and maintenance cost, these formwork cycles are, life cycles are decided. So accordingly, the formwork should be so designed and constructed that it can be removed in parts without collapsing the structure or without collapsing the formwork system as such, so that it can be reused. And this should also facilitate ease of inspection. Wherever the inspections are planned, it should have maybe a small window or something, so that you can actually inspect the actual concrete if you want to do so. Should also permit maximum reuses, so thereby the cost of concrete is reduced, and also should be designed in such a way that it requires minimum cutting, wastage and assembly. Okay. So accordingly, the formwork structure should be designed, and even the actual construction also should be designed in such a way that there is no complex shape or a very particular shape wherein you are actually doing lot of waste of cutting and using of the reuse of the formwork. So all these are the basic requirements for formwork. Now I have been keeping on saying there are a lot of load acting on the formwork. So what are the different forms of load which comes onto the formwork? Let us discuss one after the other. Dead load. So if you talk about dead load, the self weight of the formwork, which is not like changing, and it just acts onto the structure. This actual self weight of the formwork, the weight of fresh concrete, and any other temporary work which is supported by the formwork, okay, which can be even scaffolds or anything. So which actually it's integrated part of this whole temporary structure. The imposed load, it can be your storage of materials, lateral pressure on the fresh concrete, or unsymmetrical placement of concrete. Generally what happens when you pour in the concrete through pumps, it is actually poured in one particular place only and the concrete starts spreading ahead. So there can be unsymmetrical imbalance of concrete load, and as a result you may have a different load acting onto the whole structure. Then environmental load, it can be wind, it can be seismic, it can be water pressure, earth pressure and so on. As far as possible, the water table should be kept tight when you are using the formwork, because that water is really dangerous when it comes on to the formwork and to the structure. So let us talk about formwork in foundations. So precautions should be taken to prevent burying of forms due to the collapse of the soil. So what happens is, generally the formwork need not be taken too much of precaution when it comes to foundation. Only the strength aspects are generally seen. Okay, otherwise the other formworks, the neatness of the structure also depends on the quality of formwork. But as far as when you talk about foundation, it is not too much of a worry for any contractor. Okay, but the other issue is the water table can cause serious problems and accidents or incidents and so on, and the forms may also be damaged if there is water table, and as a result there can be collapse of the whole structure also. That you should keep in mind. Okay, so proper planning and dewatering is most required when you are working below ground levels, and also this is also can result in accidents or incidents, that you have to keep in mind. Now if you see the types of foundations, there are so many types, but we are only going to talk about two here. One is stepped footing and another one is sloped footing, and these are common terminology in any civil engineering. So stepped footing, just like your steps, you have different layers wherein the load acting on above is spread across onto the foundation and to the soil below. In sloped footing, there is a tapering portion from where the load acting on the columns is spread onto the foundation and to the soil below. That is primarily called sloped footing. In sloped footings, the top forms are not a serious concern, but it's based on the angle of repose, the top forms may be there. Okay, in stepped footing it's very simpler. Actually you have to vary the dimensions. Nowadays formwork comes with different series of dimensions wherein you can alter the size accordingly, and the formworks can be placed to make a quick easy steps ahead. Okay, that's primarily called a stepped footing. Now let us talk about formwork for superstructure. So the first one is wall or column formwork, which is also called shuttering. So this is primarily a picture of an wall formwork. Okay, and the same way you have for column formwork, and as such we call it as a mold also. When it wants to have a desired shape, it's primarily called as a mold or shuttering. So forms should be capable of easily being stripped away in no seconds. In tall forms, it is desirable to provide windows at appropriate levels for proper inspections, and also to checking on to placement of concrete, to do vibrations and so on. So there should be an adequate window for doing all these small activities of the concreting work. So any method which is applicable for can be used for connecting the panels in place, and these are all called panels. So these panels can be connected in place not by broken reinforcement rods which is available in the site and so on. There should be a proper procedure for connecting the panels, which can be adjustable clamps, or it can be bolts, or any other standard practice which is supposed to be done can be used, because they also should take care of the load acting on to the temporary structure. Walls, the two phases of shutters. So what happens is, this formwork first is they place the shutter, then they place the reinforcement in between the shutters, then they pour the concrete. So the two phases of the shutters of the wall should be kept in place by appropriate ties, and these width of the two phases of shutters should be maintained uniform all across the wall formworks. And spacing can be maintained by means of tubes, or it can be braces or studs, whatever applicable practices it should be done. and there should be a proper oil also on in order to remove the shutter after the concreting is placed. So this oil container should be closed after it is applied onto the formwork and put away from fire sources. So this will also eliminate fire hazard, and spillage of oil, if there is anything, should be cleaned and maintained. Also it should be avoided. And the crane operator for lifting of the panels, okay, so they should be properly experienced, should be aware of how to lift the panels, which should be in the design briefs. So unless the formwork is properly designed onto the lifting points and so on, should be identified there itself, and with that places only the formwork should be lifted in sides. The slings used for lifting panel should also have adequate capacity and should be free from defects, and it should be ensured when the panels are lifted, no loose bolts or nuts or anything is falling off and so on. So it should be properly taken care, and when the panels are lifted, it should go as a single piece and not like loose hanging substances should not be seen when the panels are lifted. And when the panels are lifted, again the workmen should not be allowed to walk below those places, because it's a fall hazard position. And lifting, when the panels are lifted, unless the crane operator is assured that the panels have been safely secured, he should not release the panel. Till then the panel should be held with the cranes. And when de-shuttering happens, it should be done only from the top, especially when you are having a tall forms. Okay. So these are some of the safety precautions in column wall formworks. Next is a beam slab formwork, and so this generally comes as beam slab, and accordingly some provisions maintained in the slab so that it acts together. Okay. So no temporary structure or props should be erected on soft soil unless the soil is really compacted and it's ensured that the bearing is adequate below the props. And soffit shuttering of slabs at upper stories should also be protected from blowing off through wind, okay, especially when you are going on multi-story connections. Okay, on the top shutters, when there is no load acting onto the shutter, in the sense when there is no reinforcement placed or when there is no concrete poured in, then there can be a wind force which can blow off all those shutters. So it should be tightly fixed and secured in place. Panel dimensions of prefabricated side shutters should be fixed so that during pumping of concrete or pouring in concrete, the panels are not bulging and yielding, giving way to the pressure which comes onto the structure. So that should be maintained, otherwise there can be a collapse of the formwork and the concrete. Reinforcement steel rods or any other material should be in place with the help of lock pins, and other means of locking should not be attempted. The scaffolding frames should be erected such that the ladders can be used for reaching onto the formwork, or even otherwise the scaffolds and the formwork can be aligned together so that the workers are having a free movement between the formwork and the scaffolds. If there is any opening in the slab or a roof opening, okay, so primarily for want of anything, okay, for passing of ducts or anything, so that should be properly supported with the planks, and accordingly the slab should be casted and should be kept closed, barricaded and provided with safety nets below. Okay, so by mistake if the movement happens, still the worker should not be falling off. So there should be a safety net below openings left in the slabs. Edge of the formwork should have a proper guardrails to prevent fall of workers. While de-staging the formwork system, the frames and bracings should be lowered only using rope and pulley arrangement. Although there are other means of manual handling of these de-staging, but still it is recommended to have rope and pulley arrangement. Workmen should not be allowed to stand below the formworks when the de-staging happens, de-shuttering process is happening, and also the area should be completely barricaded to not allow the unauthorized people into the premises. De-shuttering materials should be stacked neatly for future storage. So site precautions, common site precautions, formal checks are recommended when the proposed founding level for the false work is in preparation. So at different stages the false work has to be checked for its strength. Okay. When the false work has attained a height of 10 meters, then there should be formal check. At intermediate stages, when the strength or stability of the formwork has been adversely affected with the environmental conditions or loading conditions or maybe unauthorized interference of anything. So, as a result, it has to be checked, and before applying the load, in the sense before pouring in the concrete, again the strength of the formwork has to be thoroughly checked. Also, vibrations when happening through needle vibrators can often try to alter the position of the props from their support base. When the needle vibrators are poked into the concrete for compaction, then obviously there can be dislocation of the props, and hence, so when the concreting is going on, there should be a person standing for checking the safety of props, and also when some props are dislocated, the load acting on that particular prop will be transferred onto the adjacent props, and yielding may very quickly happen, and as a result the other props may fail, and as a result subsequently there can be an accident or an collapse of the concrete structure. Okay, and also there should be a means of communication between the person operating the needle vibrator and the person standing below that level of the floor or slab, in order to give communication or signals that props has been dislocated, and until it is repaired and sufficiently corrected, the concreting may be stopped and then renewed. Electrical safety should be, against electrocution should be taken care of when you are using electric shutter vibrators. Fire safety should be also taken care of, and accordingly fire safety equipment should be in sight, especially when you are using timber formworks. And so site welding, okay, reinforcement when you want to have, when larger diameter rods are used and when you want to connect two rods using welding, then accordingly it should not be done over any timber shutters. Okay, the reinforcement should be taken, the welding should be taken care of ahead of your placing in above the shutters. Some more site precautions while erecting formwork. So, there should be proper safety signs, barricades to prevent unauthorized people entering into the site. Also, while you are placing of your formworks, or while you are pouring in concrete, or maybe you are stripping off the formwork, during all precautions there should be erection on safety signs and barricades. All provisions of the design and drawings should be complied with, and as I said already, it should not be misunderstood since it is temporary structure. So, the design and safety precautions and the construction of details, whatever is given in the drawings, should be really adhered to, and including the safety precautions, because these temporary structures are very critical for to give the final good or quality construction later on to the permanent structure. Any excavation nearby which can influence the safety of the false work should also be accounted for in the planning. If you wanted to erect the formworks and there are few excavations which are close by, then the soil has been already disturbed. So, accordingly that has to be considered while you are putting up your false works in your design and construction. The bearing soil should be sound and suitably prepared, and also that there should be sole plates or base plates should be provided in order to prevent settlement with the ground levels. Safety measures should be taken to prevent impact of water, traffic score due to water and so on, and adequate bracing, struts, ties should be installed with the progress of execution in order to maintain the strength and stability of formwork at intermediate and final stages. There should be adequate places marked on the drawing itself where your materials can be stored, your equipment can be stored, and only in those earmarked places your material and equipment should be stored when the concreting operation is going on, and no other places it should be done, and you should be fully following the design criteria for that. Inclusion of lifting points also in the design for lifting the panels or the formwork panels should be clearly indicated, and the detail of the formworks also should be indicated when they are crane handled. The deterioration of materials due to storage, reuse or maybe misuse should be checked, and corrective measures should be taken for safety precautions before you are using the formwork. Then incorporation of scaffolds, working platforms and guardrails into the formwork design at all times should also be enabled, so that you have a seamless movement of worker and equipment into the structure. So, that also should be taken care of in the formwork drawing. So, during concreting, so we have talked only about erection of formwork. So, during concreting, adequate access in the proper positions should be provided for the smooth movement of worker, material and equipment. So, all should be enabled. All precautions should be taken care of to prevent accident in terms of flooding in the foundations, that also should be taken care of. The forms should be very clean and free from any wood shavings or maybe dirt, grit and so on. Maybe the earlier concrete which is available on the formwork, everything should be cleaned up when the formwork is in place, because it may affect the strength of the concrete. The forms and joints are in such a way that they should be preventing leakage, any leakage of mortar and slurry, especially during vibrations and pouring in of concrete. Only approved coating of foam or release agent should be applied, and this should not be touching up the reinforcement, and the reinforcement should be very clean from the same. The sequence of putting in the forms and the sequence of removal of the forms, the rate of concreting, the method of pouring in the concrete, the position of concrete joints, everything should be as per the design processes, and it should not vary from that sequence. The reinforcement and the false work has been should be checked, and the permission to commence the placement of concrete should be then noted by the site supervisor, and then only the concrete should be starting to pour into the structure. The thickness of the concrete should be maintained at all times as per the drawing, and as I said, the imbalance level of concrete and one place of pouring in concrete, all should be avoided as much as possible. The props and bracings should be maintained for proper strength, and especially during the placement of concrete and vibration. The concreting may also has to be stopped when catastrophic issues are happening in the site. Platforms for the movement of workers and for the mechanized concrete buggies should be separate, and they are not placed, and the load is not placing onto the reinforcement, and it does not go to the reinforced steel. In spite of this, there can be so many reasons for formwork failures. Improper stripping and shore removal. Okay, what happens is initially when a house or a building construction happens, first they do wall column formworks after the foundation, and then they do the slab or the beam formwork, putting all the props and supports. After this concrete has attained the sufficient strength, so these props may be removed and the shoring generally happens, and then the forms are actually replaced or put into the floor above. Okay, and this shoring and reshoring keeps on happening unless the concrete has attained sufficient strength and so on. Now, what happens is, before the concrete in a particular level has reached sufficient strength, if improper stripping happens here and there, then actually you are collapsing the structure. Okay, without proper strength attained onto the concrete which is in the floor below, and you start loading up the formwork and start pouring in the concrete in the floor above, then obviously you may have formwork failure and accident can happen. Inadequate lateral bracing, and especially when you are pushing up the formworks to floors above, multiple floors above, you should take care of adequate lateral bracings, because the loads coming onto the lateral end may start increasing. Okay, and apart from the load acting on to the formwork itself. So, that you should have adequate diagonal, horizontal bracings of shores, that also should be maintained and checked for during inspections, and suggested for additional lateral bracings and ties should be maintained for stability of the formwork. Vibration due to placing equipment. So, maybe sometimes equipment such as vibrators, okay, which is moving around in the site for compaction of concrete, that can create vibration to the concrete and also to the formwork itself. So the forms sometimes collapse because when you accidentally disturb the props or the support place, then the forms can accidentally collapse, and so this can also be and also the forms can also be dislocated with the movement of workers, with the movement of vehicles moving around in the site, and also the equipment on the formwork and the actual effect of vibrating concrete. So that should be kept in mind, and you should be looking for you should be looking for the stability of the formwork at every time. Unstable soil, that also should be taken care of, this we have discussed enough. Inadequate control of concrete placement, as I said, there is a rate with which temperature variation with which the concrete gets pumped or poured into the structure, and the temperature is starts differing. Okay. So now when the rate of placement of or the pouring in of concrete is varying, or when the concrete is poured at a different speed, then what happens is the rate is generally varied and the temperature also generally varies. Okay. This can create an imbalance onto the load onto the structure, so that also has to be kept in mind, and the lateral pressure overloading onto the forms. So what happens is, if this load anticipated in the design is not actually into the construction site, the formwork can fail. Okay. That should be kept in mind, and accordingly it should be tested for the pressure and also for the temperature of the concrete which comes out of the pumps. Lack of attention to details, always the small ties, the knots, the nails with which used to bind or close the shutters, all not much detail attention is generally given, but that is really essential because they also take care of some load that comes onto the formwork. Even when the basic formwork design is soundly conceived, small differences in assembly and the strength details all can happen, and as a result a formwork can also fail. Okay. So this may be very simple, like insufficient nailing or failure to tighten the locking devices and so on. So that should be taken care of. Removal of formwork and scaffolds, and based on the type of formwork, whether it is wall formwork or slab formwork and so on, there can be differences in the repetition cycle. Okay. And as such the formworks can be removed. Okay. And again the material with which the formwork is made. Okay. And here also there is a life cycle of repetition for reusage. Okay. So that also should be kept in mind, and accordingly the shoring and reshoring process will continue, and this formwork can be used for the floor above and so on. So that also should be taken care of when you are that should be borne in mind when you are planning for the formwork life cycle and the schedule of your construction. So what happens is, the formwork and the scaffold when you are removing, there should be some safety precautions you should keep in mind. The formwork should not be removed unless the concrete has attained sufficient strength. It need not be complete strength, sufficient strength wherein the shores and reshores can help to balance the load. So that should be kept in mind, and the load acting on to the structure also you have to keep in mind whether that particular concrete has reached the strength, and then only the formwork should be thought of removed. The formwork should be dismantled as per the sequence and instructions of the engineer or as given in the formwork drawing. The sequence of removal of formwork should be maintained at any point of time, and only workmen who actually know the procedure of removing the formwork should be allowed in the area, and they should only be removing it as per the sequence. The person concerned and the workers who are actually stripping off the formwork should know the knowledge of the sequence of releasing the formworks, and accordingly should know the props location left in position. The forms are eased off from concrete faces to prevent the damage to either to the concrete or to the forms. Accordingly the forms should be stripped off, and the forms and shores must not be removed until it is determined by the employer that the concrete has gained sufficient strength and the superimposed loads that comes onto it. So all the false work material are properly stacked, maintained, and maybe sometimes quality checks are done, and then it is actually reused into the next levels. Any member should not be allowed to be dropped from a height and should be carefully brought down because it may affect the strength of the formwork. So, these are the references from where the complete material has been taken. So, with this, this particular lecture is over. Thank you.